Sup, freaks? It's your Uncle Marty here to introduce this episode with Bob McElrath. But before we begin, I just want to give a heartfelt apology to all my Texan freaks who may have listened to RHR that was posted last night, March 25th, 2021. Officially 1952 Moscow time. I fudged up. I got my Texas geography wrong. Terribly wrong. Embarrassingly wrong. That's on me. In the moment, I had a brain fart. Got Dallas and Houston mixed up with each other. I know it's blasphemous. But I'm going to try hard to right my wrong and to earn the love from my Texan freaks back. Yeah, I'm sorry. I woke up feeling embarrassed, frankly. Truly embarrassed. I already can't pronounce words too good. Now I'm just proving that my geography is not up to snuff. I'm going to try to get better. For you freaks, you deserve it. You deserve better. Now we'll try to give you better. This episode was brought to you by our good friends at the Cash App. Cash App. Or help me stack sats, send sats, receive sats, sell sats. If you so please, we're saying sats. Because sats are the standard. There's 100 million sats in one Bitcoin, and you can stack whole sats using the Cash App. You can also get cash sats back when you use your Cash Card Boost. Anywhere Visa's accepted, and you have your Bitcoin Boost initiated. You get sats back when you go purchase things somewhere. It's pretty dope. Cash App can even be your bank account. They have offering account numbers and routing numbers, so you get your paychecks direct deposited into the app. The whole shebang. Go figure it out. Go download the Cash App. Use the code STACKINGSATS. That's STACKINGSATS. When you download the app, you're going to get $10, and $10 is going to go to our good friends at Owls Lacrosse. That's Owls Lacrosse. Woo! 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 Owls Lacrosse. This rip is also brought to you by our good friends at Hodl Hodl. Hodl Hodl is helping you. If you're a Bitcoiner in need of some liquidity and you don't want to sell your Bitcoin, they have their Lend product that is available to U.S. citizens. All right? It's an incredible product. It's allowing you to keep your Bitcoins, okay? Lend at Hodl Hodl is a new non-custodial Bitcoin-backed lending platform that allows peer-to-peer lending. Individual users meet on the platform globally, anonymously, on their own terms. You put your Bitcoin up as collateral in a multi-sig escrow account. You hold one key. You're getting some liquidity by borrowing. You don't need to entrust someone with your funds, all right? You have the collateral locked in escrow and never be rehypothecated. You hold one key. You can always track that collateral. You control a key to it. If you have some stable coins and you want to get some yield on those, you want to get some return, Lend at Hodl Hodl also gives you the ability to put those up to be lent out so that you can get returns on that. They're saying as high as 25% in some cases, APR. So go create your offers and set your own terms on lend.hodlhodl.com. That's lend.hodlhodl.com. This rip is also brought to you by good friends at Brains. Brains doing incredible things, okay? They've been around for a while. You may know them because they operate Slush Pool. Slush Pool's pretty popular. It's been around. First ever Bitcoin mining pool, okay? They're also creating Brains OS Plus. This is firmware for miners. You download the Brains OS firmware, and it makes your miner stack more sats. I'm just going to put it like that, simply as that. We've had Jan and Pavel, the founders of Brains, on the podcast before. We've had Edward Evenson on the podcast as well. Go check out those episodes. Brains has been incredibly Bitcoin-focused throughout their whole existence. They released the first free and open source firmware for Antminer S9s, so that miners would have an alternative to Bitmain firmware. This was big back in the day when Amplead was around. They discovered that there was a backdoor in Antminer firmware that could give Bitmain the ability to remotely power off ASICs, and they provided miners run the S9s with the ability to avoid that situation. 2018, Brains team verified that S9s could run about 13% more efficiently with overt ASIC boost, and they made that available to their customers as well. So go check out everything. Brains OS basically auto-tunes firmware to give miners more control over their ASICs and help them stack more sats, like I said. Currently support S9s, S17, T17 generation, and the dev team is working to support What's Miners now. When What's Miner? They're working on it soon, TM. They're also working on the open source initiative, which we talk about in this episode particularly, which is Stratum V2, along with Matt Corallo and some Square Crypto devs. They also publish a lot of content to educate Bitcoiners about some of the lesser known aspects of the mining industry. Their content is incredible. Their profitability tools are incredible. If you're a miner, go check them out. If you're a Bitcoiner, wants to learn about mining, go check them out. Brains, BRAIINS.com. BRAIINS.com. Last but not least, this episode is brought to you by our good friends at Compass Mining. All right, Compass Mining is trying to make it easy for you freaks to go from zero to mining Bitcoin as simply as possible. They take away all the hard stuff for you. They help you acquire a miner. They find a hosting facility with competitive energy costs. And they set up that relationship. They allow you to go on the site, you buy a miner, you pick a hosting facility, and they get that miner, and they plug it in at that hosting facility, and they start streaming you sats from the miner. Compassmining.io, COMPASSMINING.io. Make it easy. They're making it easy. They want to help distribute mining to more individuals. You can go from zero to mining at a competitive energy cost. You don't have to plug it in at your house. Annoy your wife with how loud it is. Annoy your parents with how loud it is. Annoy your in-laws with how loud it is. Heat up the house. Drive up the electricity bill. Compass Mining is here to help you avoid all those hairy situations. I hope you guys enjoy this episode. And to all my techs and freaks, I will make it up to you. Only time will prove this. But I promise I'm going to make a concerted effort to make up for my terrible mistake. I love all y'all. Enjoy. Dickie!
You've had a dynamic where money's become freer than free.
If you talk about a Fed just gone nuts, all the central banks going nuts.
So it's all acting like safe haven.
I believe that in a world where central bankers are tripping over themselves to devalue their currency, Bitcoin wins. In the world of fiat currencies, Bitcoin is the victor.
I mean, that's part of the bull case for Bitcoin.
If you're not paying attention, you probably should be.
What is up, freaks? It's your boy Marty Bent here on a Thursday afternoon fighting through a cold. But very excited for the conversation I'm about to have. It's a very important one. We're getting back to basics here. I wrote about it in the newsletter this morning. Came across a YouTube video with like 120 views, and it was a conversation about mining pool protocols and how to make sure they're sufficiently decentralized to be resilient against state attacks. The conversation revolved around Stratum V2, its potential shortcomings, and another type of pool that may want to focus on pool protocol, Braidpool, which is sort of an iteration on P2P pool, if I'm remembering correctly. Sitting down with Bob McElrath. Bob, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for all you've done for Bitcoin throughout the years. Pivotal on my journey, because I believe, if I understand correctly, you helped start the New York BitDevs meetup, the white paper series specifically, correct?
Yeah, I didn't start it. I mean, Justin was the guy, he's the brains behind that. Yeah, I actually rebooted it. There was an iteration of the White Paper Wednesday before I got there. But yeah, I went to New York in 2015, I believe it was. And so ran the White Paper Wednesday for a couple of years there, which is a lot of fun. Just kind of on the back of my previous career in theoretical physics, where we would do what we call journal clubs in academia, where we just do a close reading on a paper that was important.
Yeah, well, thank you for revamping it, because that was right around the time that I moved to New York, and that was the first Bitcoin meetups I went to, were those White Paper Wednesdays.
Oh, really? Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah. in person. Union Square Ventures was the venue back then, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you for that. I have a funny story. It's been told on the podcast quite a few times. I was in the back of the room nervous, having only ever seen the people in the room on Twitter, and I pointed to the clock across the way, across Union Square, and said to Peter Todd, "Hey, how prescient is that? We're across the way from a deck clock, and we're here talking about Bitcoin." And he was like, "That's a time clock, sir." I was like, "Oh wow." But no, yeah, I mean, the reason I brought you on already described. Came across this discussion you were having with Eric Voskuil, the Bitcoin Munich meetup YouTube channel, about mining pool protocols and how we should be designing them to make sure they're sufficiently resilient against state attacks. And you were mentioning something that you started working on in 2015, which is Braidpool, and I'd love to just dive into the whole topic, like why we should be focused on the mining pool protocol level, the solutions that exist today, and how we can make it more resilient via something like Braidpool.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so for those that are kind of not aware of how mining works, you basically you try and mine a block, and your miner doesn't hit the difficulty target for Bitcoin. It sends this incomplete work. There is a proof of work, but it's not enough work to qualify for a Bitcoin payout. You send this to a centralized entity called Pool. The Pool puts this in their database. They do accounting on it, and they count how many of these that you produce. And then if anybody within the pool produces a block, they then take those funds and distribute them proportionally to all the people who contributed what's sometimes called weak blocks. In other words, the shares that you contribute. So that's what pools are. That's the way pools work. And kind of the risk factor of pools is that there are only a handful of them. They are easy to censor. If a government, wanted to censor them, there are only a couple of entities to go to and say, hey, you have to, censor this address, or you have to not process transactions from this entity, or this miner is in a jurisdiction we don't like, you're not allowed to pay him. That would be very easy for government to do, right? And that kind of goes against the whole narrative of Bitcoin. But the reasons pools exist are kind of an economic necessity, and it all comes down to two concepts. Eric likes to call it proximity premium, and the other is variance. So let me interrupt me at any point if you want to clarify or discuss further, but I'll just ramble on here.
Keep rambling.
Okay, so the variance is the concept that every day there are 144 blocks produced, right? The error on your profit in that 144 blocks is basically the square root. So the number of blocks that are produced in a day is 144 plus or minus 12, and that is simply statistics, right? That is Poisson error on the number of blocks in a day. If I'm a smaller miner, in other words, I'm not earning all the blocks, I'm earning, let's say, 10% of the blocks or 1% of the blocks, right? I'm earning 1% of the blocks on average. I might produce a block one day, and I won't produce a block the next day. And in practice, most miners are much smaller than 1%. So you might produce a block a month, and the variance on your profit on a yearly basis can be quite high, right? You can't really stand in 1 year for your profit to be 50% lower one year and then 50% higher in another year. It's very difficult to do planning. It's very difficult to procure your miners and know what your budget is and things like that. I did an analysis for, I gave a talk at the Magic Crypto Conference in 2019 in New York, and I did a little analysis asking the question, if I want my annual variance on my profit to be less than 1%, how large does my pool need to be? And on Bitcoin, the answer is about 20%. Each pool needs to be 20% in order for my annual variance on my profit to be 1%. Your monthly variance is higher; it's like 3.5% or something like that. But your annual variance is down to 1%, and that gives me confidence on my budget and my mining operation. Now, that if you look at the pools that exist today, you might notice all of them are around 20%. And I hypothesize this is kind of a natural equilibrium point for the size of pools. Miners choose pools; they don't want them to be too big. If the pool gets above 33%, we're starting to get into 51% attack territory. definitely not above 51%, right? But they don't want them to be too small either. So the net effect is that, if each pool is 20%, you have 5 pools globally, right? 5 entities to attack to essentially shut down Bitcoin. So how do we solve this problem, right? We have to trust these entities, pools. They are often in strange jurisdictions. Lots of them are in China, slush pools in the Czech Republic. Your mining operation might not be in the same legal jurisdiction, and they owe you money. There's counterparty risk here. There's contracts. Most pools don't even have any contracts. You just send them your shares and hope they pay you, right? But as the industry grows and becomes more professional, these questions of legal matters are going to become more important. If my pool doesn't pay me, what is my legal recourse? And in practice, people have basically YOLO'd it, because switching pools is relatively easy. You could switch pools in a relatively short notice and only miss, a couple hours or a couple days worth of blocks. But long term, what we really want is we want to have a decentralized pool. We want something that integrates directly with Bitcoin itself. If the block rate on Bitcoin was a lot faster, we wouldn't have had this problem in the first place. But for various reasons, that's not possible. So what do we do with this? Years ago, there was a mining pool called P2 Pool. So P2 Pool was itself a blockchain. It had a 30-second block time, and its purpose was to mine Bitcoin blocks. So with a 30-second block time, that's 20 times slower or 20 times faster than Bitcoin. So on average, 1 out of every 20 blocks on P2 Pool was actually a Bitcoin block. And then P2 Pool used its blockchain to account for those other 19 blocks on average in that time interval. And from that one block that actually was mined on Bitcoin, pay those other 20 people. And if you go back and look at the blockchain explorer and some of these older blocks, you'll see some Coinbases that have between 20 and 100 addresses in them. These are P2 Pool blocks. The Coinbase has like 20 addresses or 100 addresses because it's paying all the other miners. So that was a great idea. It didn't work for a number of different reasons, but it was fully decentralized. It is a blockchain, and it's frankly a great idea. Why didn't it work? Well, as you decrease the time interval between blocks, you increase the probability that 2 miners accidentally produce a block at the same time. And you increase what's called the orphan rate. This is what Eric Bosko calls the proximity premium. If you are close to another miner in space and in time, you can produce blocks very quickly after each other, because I hear about his blocks faster because I'm close to him in space and in time. But on a global scale, there's a minimum time that it takes to propagate propagate any message to everybody on Earth. And using the analysis I did in 2015, this is about 6 seconds using the Bitcoin network to get a block to everybody. Today, it's probably closer to around a half a second to a second. So there's a window of time between a half a second and a second where 2 miners could produce blocks at the same time. This sets an absolute lower limit on how fast you can produce these blocks. And the idea here is that you've got a blockchain that's producing blocks very fast, because each one of those blocks is a share, as you'd account for in a mining pool. But we're doing our accounting on a blockchain with blockchain rules, and that everybody's enforcing these blockchain rules. Everybody's enforcing that everybody gets paid. And by using a decentralized network like this, there's no one to attack if you want to take it down, right? It's also more fair in that you don't have any counterparty risk. You don't have a contract with somebody. You don't have to worry about what jurisdiction this pool is in. It would be a lot better in a lot of different ways if we had something like this that worked. So I did some work starting in 2015 through about 2019, looking at a different structure for a blockchain called a direct acyclic graph. And if you're interested, I gave 3 talks about this total, I believe, under the title Braiding the Blockchain, if you just Google that. And really what I contributed to the conversation is how to organize a blockchain such that every block can have more than one parent. And the purpose of doing this is to allow the block time to be very fast, which corresponds to allowing a large number of miners to contribute shares and get paid. So that's my contribution to it. At this point, I really would like to pass the torch on this subject. I've worked on it for some time. I made my contribution, and for various other reasons in my life, I don't have the time to write the whole thing myself, but there's enough people in the world who are interested in this and need it, but I'm hoping other people will pick it up. So there's a fellow, Jungly on Twitter, who is now hell-bent to write a spec for this and get a prototype implementation. And that's where we stand today.
Okay. So I want to dive more into like the specifics of this because this is a very interesting concept. And I didn't realize P2Pool was its own blockchain.
Yeah, it is.
And so like instead of producing hashes and contributing hash to this blockchain, instead of getting a reward and a token, you're getting shares in the payout of the Bitcoin block reward. So I guess the token would be
That's right.
a claim on future shares.
That's right. So there isn't necessarily a native token on these blockchains with the separate transaction system. So P2Pool did not have a native token, right? So it wasn't a shitcoin, which is one of the things that made it great. But instead, it simply did accounting for shares. And its only native token was Bitcoin. One of the things I have proposed for a future potential Braidpool would be to actually have a native token. And that native token would be proportional to the number of estimated hashes contributed in a share. And this enables a number of things. It enables different miners to mine at different rates without overwhelming the system by sending too many blocks. It allows derivatives because this enables hash rate derivatives because one token is essentially the hash rate. The other token is Bitcoin. So I can do, d Bitcoin, d hash rate and create futures and options out of that, which is exactly a financial instrument that miners really need.
So would this be like is this like technically a side chain or is it completely separate? Like I'm trying to
it's not
conceptualize
a
this in my brain.
It is a merge mined blockchain, right? So if you're familiar with like Dogecoin and Litecoin, so Dogecoin and Litecoin are merge mined. So the same mining hardware can mine both at the same time. So this is similar in concept. The same mining hardware mines both the blockchain for P2Pool or for Braidpool and Bitcoin at the same time. So the block header that it's mining is always actually a Bitcoin block. If it doesn't satisfy the difficulty target for Bitcoin, but does satisfy the difficulty target for the braid, it can become a node in the braid, right? But not a Bitcoin block. And then sometimes those blocks are actually Bitcoin blocks. And there are rules about what has to be in that Bitcoin block to pay everybody involved on the braid.
Okay.
And those rules are enforced by the braid blockchain rules, not the Bitcoin blockchain rules. And practically the way it appeared in P2Pool was rules about what had to be in Coinbase. In other words, your Coinbase had to contain all of the address from all the other people who submitted shares in proportion with the right calculation of the number of Satoshis they were owed, right? It's a simple way to think about it.
That's actually another question I had, like illuminating the old Coinbases with many addresses, like how when these miners in this decentralized pool are sending shares, they just attach an address to every share or every block to. Okay.
That's right.
All right.
Which is what you do with a mining pool anyway, right?
Yeah. All right. And so I guess again to dive deeper into the conversation that you and Eric were having with the trade-offs with this, right? Like you already described some of it with the proximity. Like I guess the big knock or question that needs to be answered is latency and profitability for smaller miners versus using a decentralized pool versus larger miners using a more centralized option.
Yeah, so that's the problem I think I've solved. There are plenty of unsolved problems. But using the directed acyclic graph, allowing miners to essentially choose their own difficulty, so that rather than producing 5 blocks in a time period, they produce 1 block. What you can essentially do is set the braid up such that everybody targets the same variance rather than the same block rate, right? And if you look at any pool, they will scale you down. So if you're producing shares too fast, they will they'll double your difficulty and double again until you're producing shares at a rate that doesn't overwhelm their systems. So you can do the same thing with the braid. And what I've showed is how you essentially add those together. So 2 different blocks with 2 different target difficulties can be added in a reasonable way using a directed acyclic graph. So that should be solved. And I'm happy to contribute to somebody who wants to carry this forward. There are plenty of other unsolved things. like, what is the native token? How does that work? Does it have a transaction system? Do we do atomic swaps so that people can essentially instantly sell their shares for Bitcoin through market makers on exchanges? There's lots of interesting problems to solve.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. And again, going back to the way pools are set up now and the way Stratum V2, if adopted widely, would work. You said in the talk of the Bitcoin Munich meetup, the Stratum V2 improves in a lot of things, just like the payout mechanism is where everything's hung up. Right?
Yeah. I mean, Stratum V2 fixes everything except for the fact that someone owes you money, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you don't know if they're doing their accounting properly. You don't know if you can sue them if they fail their responsibilities. You don't really have any recourse, and they are a target for potential attack.
Okay. And so, like, what if you could open source the payout mechanism, right? And like not
That's
have
the
it.
goal. That's the goal. I mean, there has been open source pool software in the past, but you never know what's being run behind the scenes at a centralized pool, right? By using a blockchain, those rules of who and how you get paid are in the code itself. You're running it, everybody else is running it. And if they violate those rules, your node is going to reject their beads in the braid, if you will, because they didn't follow the rules. It's the same as Bitcoin, right? It's the same way we enforce rules of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
But then, those rule enforcements are completely decentralized, right? There's nobody that's holding your money. The distribution of funds is actually coming from the blockchain itself. There's no entity who has keys, and you have to trust them to do something with those keys in order for you to get paid.
Yeah.
That said, there are designs. Chris Belcher has done some work, kind of jumping off of my Braids work, where he has what he calls what are they called? These kind of federated nodes who actually handle the payout, which is another potential solution. Anyway, it's worth looking at his work as well if you're interested in this topic. But I would prefer to have all the payouts happen on chain so that you can use the blockchain rules to enforce them.
Yeah, and I guess the biggest holdup there is like if you have an individual miner within a decentralized pool that constructs a block, like how can you guarantee that they pay out to the other miners contributing to that decentralized pool?
Because he has to prove it with every block he submits.
Okay.
So let's say I submit a block, okay? So I'm mining a block that didn't hit the Bitcoin difficulty target. I did hit a lower target as required by the pool. Now, not only do I have to submit a Bitcoin block header that contains this lower proof of work target, I also have to submit proof that within that block are payouts as required by the pool. So in the case of P2 pool, what that means is not only do I reveal the header, I also reveal the Coinbase in the transaction Merkle tree, and that has to contain the addresses and correct payouts as dictated by the P2 pool blockchain. So if I don't submit all of those things, it's not considered a valid share.
Okay.
And my share is rejected, and I won't get paid for that share.
That makes a lot of sense. And so, like, if this is successful, if like a successful and working Braidpool implementation comes to market, we can end up with like one decentralized mining pool, essentially, correct? Or would there be competing?
That's the goal. I mean, there's really no like 51% attack risk with this by having one pool. Everybody could be on this pool safely without creating any risk. Unlike with centralized pools where you do have this 50, if any one of them gains 51%, it would be bad.
Yeah. Are you optimistic that this can come to market?
I am optimistic. I haven't been paying much attention to it in a while. The Bitcoin Munich guys asked me and Eric to talk about it, so we did. And I think this has sparked a bit of interest, and so I'm happy to see that interest, including from potential people who might fund this. So I'm beginning to think in the back of my mind that I might be able to put some grants together or something like that. If that's something that interests you, either from a funding perspective or from a receiving funds perspective to build this, reach out to me personally. I would love to pull that together because I don't think I can do this myself, but I would love to facilitate other people creating it.
Yeah, so I mean, it's important, and you're speaking to somebody who's been really championing Stratum V2. Disclaimer: Brains is sponsor of the podcast, but I
Well,
think it's,
as you should.
yeah,
No, as you should, right? I mean, Strategy 2 is a step in the right direction. It doesn't solve all the problems, but you got to start somewhere. And everybody should be using Strategy 2. Full stop.
right.
There's no excuse for using Strategy 1 anymore. But there are remaining problems that we would also like to solve.
Yeah. And I think just for any newcomer who may be listening to this podcast and isn't, I mean, we've already talked about it a bit, but like how important is it that we ensure that this layer is sufficiently decentralized in the future? Like right now, everybody's playing nice, and we haven't seen government's pressure pools to censor, but it could happen in the future.
It's
And like,
coming.
and what about jurisdictional arbitrage? That's something I wrote in the newsletter today. Like, what if pools are sufficiently domiciled across the globe, and one government says, "Hey, we're going to force you to censor some transactions," and another government says, "Hey, we're not going to force you to do that. So point your hash rate at a pool in our borders, so we can collect those tax revenues from the mining pool."
Well, it's happening, right? I mean, we already have the OFAC, the Office of Foreign Asset Control, has listed Bitcoin addresses that you're not allowed to do business with, basically. Now, by and large, I don't think miners are censoring those addresses, but if any service provider received a deposit from an address like that, they have to take action. They're legally required to take action. Now, does that mean miners have to do that? Not necessarily. Now, that said, there are a couple of companies who have announced they're going to make pools that are more restrictive in various ways. One of them, I believe, said that they're going to make KYC of the miners required. And the discussion is often had about whether those addresses that OFAC put out are going to be put into blacklists by miners. And the fact of the matter is, it doesn't matter. There's always going to be somebody out there that's willing to mine those addresses. And it doesn't matter. In fact, if you're interested in law enforcement, you're interested, and for clarity's sake, these addresses are truly despicable people. They're people involved in various kinds of crimes, and it would be nice if they could get caught. Well, the way you can get them caught is if they actually deposit those funds at a service provider in a jurisdiction where they have committed the crime, and then those funds can be seized, right? If we don't allow the transactions to be processed at the mining layer, they can't move the funds. They can't move them to service provider, and they can't be seized. So from a law enforcement perspective, it actually makes sense for miners to continue processing those transactions, because that's what allows those funds to move to places that law enforcement could seize them.
Very good point. It's actually one I haven't heard before, but it makes a lot of sense. I guess the whole blacklist thing is like, we don't want anybody profiting from the movement of dirty funds. That's disgusting.
Yeah, I mean, blacklisting, if blacklisting was 100% effective, what you've effectively done is destroy the coins. You've destroyed the money, right? That's not necessarily the best option. Watching the movement of funds involved in crime is itself evidence, right? And being able to see what they're doing with it, is a way to gather information. Now, we should all be using Zcash. We should all be using, things that have more privacy. But that's not the world we live in with Bitcoin today. We'll get there, but slowly. But it frankly doesn't make sense for miners to be censoring. These pools, as I understand, are focusing mainly on just KYCing the miners, so that other pool participants are confident that somebody who's on the OFAC list is not mining alongside them. I don't think it matters that much, frankly. Go ahead, do it. It makes businesses comfortable. It makes businesses comfortable. It grows the industry. That's good for all of us.
Agreed. There's always another rabbit hole to fall down in the Bitcoin space. And the mining pool layer is one that many individuals don't think about too often. Yeah. It's one we're starting to think about more at Great American Mining again, like as we expand here in the US and you see publicly traded mining companies posturing like you mentioned with KYC individual miners. That's something we want to stay as far away from as possible.
Yeah, me too. But the fact of the matter is, when you get when one end of the mining Economics is a publicly listed company, and the other end is an auditing firm, and the third end is a custody provider, like I previously worked for Fidelity. They're all going to ask this question. Like, we have to make sure that we are not facilitating crime, right? That's their legal obligation, and they have to do it, right? The fiat governments of the world have co-opted financial institutions into financial law enforcement. Now, I don't think it should be that way, but that's the way it is, and that's what they have to do. So, again, do the things that make them comfortable, but at the same time, building something like Braidpool. If we build something like Braidpool, it has to be demonstrably better in essentially every way, right? So on the financial side of things, you remove counterparty risk. That's a big benefit to these big players who are getting into mining now. It removes the possibility of government attack because there's no one to shut down, right? If you introduce a native coin, you have the possibility of creating hash rate derivatives, which is demonstrably better for everyone. These hash rate derivatives are a new market, new liquidity, new volume, right? We need to glue all those things together, right? We can't end up in the situation that P2 Pool had, where, I mean, P2 Pool failed because it wasn't better. It was worse. And making something that's worse but more decentralized is not going to work. It has to be better, and one of its side benefits has to be that it's more decentralized.
Agreed. Well, hopefully people start thinking about this more, because it does feel like the pressure is going to be heating up pretty significantly as Bitcoin crosses the $1 trillion market cap level. It seems like
I think there are 6 companies that have now filed for ETFs in the US this year. The most recent announced yesterday was Fidelity, my former employer, filed for an ETF, on the back of Fidelity Digital Assets, which I helped put together. Very proud of them for that. Congrats, guys, if any of you are listening. But I also worked for one of the previous ETF sponsors, which is SolidX, who later partnered with Van Eck. So I was there when the ETF got turned down twice, and this is going to be a point of contention for all 6 of these ETFs, right? The SEC in approving an ETF is going to ask very hard questions about ensuring that money laundering isn't going on, or that the ETF provider is doing everything they can. So, as you said, the pressure's on from many different angles. If we get an ETF, that's a pretty substantial source of pressure. And privately, there are people getting involved in investing in mining who have more restrictions on their ability to invest. We're moving away from hedge funds and private money investing in Bitcoin to public institutions, public funds investing in Bitcoin, and they have a much higher auditing and reporting and due diligence requirements than private funds. So yeah, the pressure's on.
What if we use the First Amendment? Can the First Amendment come in here and protect Bitcoin, and particularly like miners and ETFs? Like, it's just a messaging protocol. It's speech.
No.
You don't think so? Why not?
I'm not a lawyer. Don't ask me. It's a complex question.
That's something I push for. It's like, right, it's just a messaging protocol at the end of the day. Like, how come you don't go after the telecoms when 2 terrorists basically collude to attack something over their networks? Like, how come...
I'm not the right person to ask this question of, not my expertise, but I will say that the courts have ruled over and over again and refused to dip into campaign finance reform. And the argument is usually that money is a form of speech, and your ability to contribute to a political candidate is a form of free speech. So, maybe there's a path there. I don't know. Again, not my my specialty, but I think it doesn't matter. If this thing is facilitating crime, which is what they feel, without knowledge, by the way, the rates of crime on Bitcoin are much smaller than the rates of crime within the fiat industry. But if it does facilitate crime, then they're going to do everything they can. No legal hyperbole is going to stand up to an actual threat, right?
Yeah, I feel you there.
It's the fire in a crowded theater argument, right? You have free speech, but at the point that your free speech is harming people, that your right ends.
Yeah. The battles are just beginning, freaks. It's like, yeah, that's the other thing. Who's willing to stand up? Or should we even depend on people being willing to stand up, or should we make it so robust that you don't even have to worry? Which seems.
What I want to do with Braidpool is not force people to have to stand up, because no one wants to put their life on the line, right? No one wants to go out on a limb and say, I think decentralization is so important that I'm going to put my time, my capital, my life, my my risk of prosecution up for this goal. I want to get it as a side benefit by providing something else which is demonstrably economically beneficial, right? If your primary goal is decentralization and freedom, it's a hard sell. Most people are short-term thinkers. They're looking at their bottom line. They're looking at their profits. It's a lot easier to sell improved profits than it is to sell high and mighty goals of resisting the government.
Yeah, right. We are short-term thinkers. But I guess that segues into an interesting question, which I always wonder, what got you into Bitcoin originally? Being a physicist, was it?
Prior to physics, I have a whole other career in theoretical physics. Prior to Bitcoin, I have a whole other career in theoretical physics. I got my PhD at the University of Wisconsin, and I held postdocs at UC Davis, CERN in Switzerland, and then University of Heidelberg in Germany. And I graduated from grad school in 2003. I was at CERN in 2009 when the Bitcoin white paper came out. And, I've always been a software geek. Long before I went into Bitcoin, I was writing a lot of software. I had a science project in 10th grade, which is basically 10,000 lines of C++ code in 1993. I'm self-taught. I used to write a lot of software. And then once I got into physics, basically, every single one of my projects revolved around software and involved a lot of software one way or another. But the output was always some graphs, in a paper rather than a software product. But going into software after physics was always kind of a natural thing. And I was also kind of always a crypto geek. I had a PGP key from very, very early days and was always very frustrated that there was nobody I could send email to. I think I had a couple of friends that I exchanged PGP keys with back in the day. And so I always kept an eye on this kind of technology. And so when Bitcoin came out, it caught my attention right away. I have friends from when I was at CERN who swear that I was talking about it in 2009. I think I may not have discovered it until a little bit later than that. I think the first Slashdot post is when I discovered it, but it may have been earlier. I don't know. In the early days, I didn't pay it that much attention. But another thing that was going on was that I was living in Switzerland and then Germany, and I had accounts in 3 different countries. I had 3 different currencies in my my bank balances, and I basically started fooling around the foreign exchange market because I'm like, well, do I keep my money in Swiss francs or in euros or in dollars? I don't know. So I started fooling around and taught myself a lot about finance in those years. And when the writing on the wall became clear that I wasn't going to get a professor job in physics, I started looking for a job. Doing something in software was obvious, and doing something with Bitcoin was obvious. I did do a bit of mining way back then. So I mined with my GPU back in 2013, I think. I mined 0.1 Bitcoin, and at the time the price of Bitcoin was $30. So I, for a week, turned my computer into a noisy space heater. And earned $3. And I said, screw that. Screw that. I'm not doing that. I should have kept doing it, not. But instead went to work for some companies in the space. I got a software job working on Bitcoin in 2014. And so that has led to several other jobs in the space. I don't regret it for a second. It's been a wild, interesting ride and a very important one, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thankful that you found Bitcoin and got into it, because I think you're one of the better. I think you're a great thinker in the space. I think this conversation around Braidpool proves it. I think we need adversarial thinkers who are thinking about the long term. I know the price.
Yeah, we do. That's one of my, long-term frustrations is that I have this kind of thesis that we're going to end up with a discipline, which I sometimes call cryptographic engineering. And, you know, Bitcoin really is a form of cryptographic engineering. You know, Satoshi glued together a data structure, which is a blockchain, which is really a linked list, with some signatures, you know, which is cryptography, with some hashing for the mining. And he took all these cryptographic building blocks and glued them together. And this really, really requires, as you said, an adversarial thinker. You got to think about all the ways this goes wrong. And most software engineers are not adversarial thinkers. Most people write software to get it to the point that it works, and they don't evaluate the edge cases where it doesn't work. And you know, in this industry, you have to evaluate how it won't work first, because that'll be the, you know, that'll be the barn door through which the truck comes and destroys the whole thing. You know, finding that adversarial thinking is rare. You know, I think all of the core devs have it, but you don't find it among the general software engineering population. I would like to see that developed kind of as a discipline that's taught in college. I don't know if it's really possible to teach adversarial thinking. You know, I kind of found it on my own. You know, in the physics world, when you propose an experiment, you have to then go figure out like what all the different ways are that it might not be measuring the thing that you think it's measuring. And it's very adversarial. And then you go give a talk at a conference and people say, oh, that won't work, blah, blah, blah. You know, it's a very adversarial environment. So I kind of academically grew up in such an adversarial environment. So switching to Bitcoin was kind of natural to me, but that adversarial thinking is really not most people, unfortunately. I would like to see that developed into a proper discipline.
Well, could it be distilled even further to simply critical thinking, right?
No, it's more than that. It's expecting the unexpected. It's you know, trying to figure out how, you know, it's Murphy's Law, right? That which can go wrong will go wrong. You don't, you know, prioritize figuring out what might go wrong. You know, you're doomed.
Everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. I think Mike Tyson really distilled that. Very succinctly.
So creating something that works in this space is not enough. You have to create something that doesn't not work, which is a completely other world.
Yeah. Well, if you're listening out there and you're a developer, adversarial thinking, it's important. And if you're a Bitcoiner in general who's in it and very excited about the gains, these gains can be diminished if Bitcoin can be diminished, and Bitcoin can be diminished if we don't have enough adversarial thinkers. So
yeah.
How I mean, you mentioned that you'd be interested if anybody's out there listening who'd be interested in contributing to taking the torch and running with Braidpool. Where can they find you? How should they reach out? Is there anything? I think there's like a Freenode IRC channel, correct?
Yeah, there is an IRC channel on Freenode. You're welcome to join. It's a good place for discussion. You can reach out to me personally on Twitter. I've been thinking, you know, since this conversation got started by the Munich Bitcoin guys, I've been thinking more and more that I should probably orchestrate a way to get this developed, and in particular, a way to get it paid for, because I've spoken to a number of people, including some very large miners. We're very interested in this. And I have a few ideas for how to essentially fund its development. And that's been one of my challenges, is like, okay, so I could dump a year or two of effort into this without getting paid. And I just couldn't afford to do it, right? And nobody can afford to work for free. And that's kind of the tragedy of open source and blockchain software, is that, you know, Satoshi put something out there as a public good. The fact that his coins made billions was, you know, is kind of an accident. He didn't know. He put, you know, years of effort into this before launching it. He couldn't be sure that it was going to actually make money. So yeah, you know, most of the core developers are often struggling for funds, and so those of you who have the capital, please look into, you know, finding ways to contribute to them, because they are, you know, working for the greater good, as it were. And this is a similar case. You know, this is really a blockchain on par with Bitcoin. Similar amount of effort to build, and similar amount of, you know, people need to eat. People need to be funded. So I'm saying this here for the first time. I would like to orchestrate funding these people. I will try and organize a series of grants. I would like to collate people. I won't take any money for this. I won't get paid. I don't want to get paid. But I will help orchestrate getting money to the people who are working on it, and evaluating those people who are working on it, and deciding who really are the best contributors to bring this forward.
Awesome. And how big of a technical lift is it? Like,
It's big.
yeah.
You know, some of the building blocks are already there. So in the Munich podcast or meetup, we were talking between myself, Eric, and Jungly about using libBitcoin. So Eric Voskuil has written libBitcoin, which is a Bitcoin clone. And it has the property that it can run multiple blockchains at the same time. You know, the idea of like recompiling your code to run Litecoin when it's only like a one-line change is kind of silly. And so he put it all as config flags, and he could run more than one at the same time, which is something that's required for Braidpool. You have to track not only Bitcoin, but also the Braid. And P2Pool does the same thing. It was a piece of Python software, but it had to connect to a Bitcoin node so it could track it. So I think the two of them are very interested in this and would like to use libBitcoin. I'm not opposed to that. You might connect it to a Bitcoin node instead for tracking that one, but you do have to track two. And I think Eric has done some very, very smart things as far as organizing libBitcoin. When you re-implement a piece of software and refactor it, you know, the Bitcoin's written from scratch. You don't have to make all the same mistakes. And the fact of the matter is that Bitcoin core code base is kludgy and ugly and old, and it's grown organically. And you know, historically, what happens is people rewrite these things. You know, we aren't still using Netscape. It got rewritten into Chrome, Opera, and Microsoft Edge. Right. Each time that happened, it got a little better, and mistakes of the past were able to be left behind. It's a big effort to rewrite something like that, but in this case, it's already been done. The change would have to be made to the Bitcoin to track a directly acyclic graph is not that large. Probably talking between 100 and 1,000 lines of code. And everything else is basically kind of standard Bitcoin transactions, signatures, all that kind of stuff. It's already there. So I hope it's not that big of a lift, but I would estimate at least a year.
I mean, in Bitcoin terms, that doesn't seem like that long of a time, right?
Yeah, maybe. You say that now that Bitcoin's what, 12 years old?
Well, like, would this need any changes at the protocol level? I know you're mentioning libBitcoin.
No.
I know with Core, you need for Shroud and V2, if they want to do the job negotiation part, they have to get something changed there. It's not consensus code, but it would need a merge at the core level. Would this be any
the goal
different?
would be for it to not require any consensus changes, right? I don't think there's anything that actually requires consensus changes, which is actually kind of interesting from a prototyping perspective, because I've spoken to developers from like Monero and Litecoin are interested in the idea too. You know, we could make Braidpool for Litecoin, and that would be kind of a great test bed for it before deploying it on Bitcoin. You know, the difference between Litecoin and Bitcoin is minimal. It's just the hash function, really, and the name. A couple numbers changed. So not requiring those changes in the parent blockchain is important, and I don't think it's required.
Yeah. All right. Well, freaks, let's get on it. Let's make sure we're thinking adversarially and making sure Bitcoin is robust as possible. Right? Because
Yeah.
right now, what, 93% of hash rate is dominated by pools in China?
Is it that high? Oh boy.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think it's that high. But that, well, you were saying earlier, like it would take, like, that's one thing, Great American Mining, like we have prepared, like we need to switch pools. Our head engineer, Austin, just thinks we can do it within 10 minutes. He's pretty certain, like we need to switch, like push.
Yeah, it's worth, you know, in lieu of Bitcoin or sorry, Braidpool, and you know, before something like that exists, you know, miners need to be able to switch quickly, and that's, you know, in many ways, it's kind of just a script you have to write on the back end that'll do it. But there's authentication and, you know, pool authentication issues and things like this. My experience has been to the miners that I've talked to that they are actually pretty sticky with their pool. They don't like switching pools. Now, I think this has changed somewhat. You know, back in the day, we used to use what's called PPLNS, which was pay per last n shares. And this was essentially what it did is it averaged over the last n blocks and then paid people for the average of that, their contribution during that time period. Today, most pools use PPS, pay per share. So you submit a share of work, and you essentially immediately get paid. Now, this introduces counterparty risk because you don't know if the pool has the funds, and that's a very important question. But it's more immediate, And in particular, it makes pool switching a lot easier, right? Because if I stop contributing hash rate, switch to another one, it doesn't affect my bottom line. Whereas in the past with PPLNS, one of the reasons we used PPLNS was to prevent people from pool hopping. Because on some of the smaller coins that got 51% attacked, it was done via pool hopping. There were, things like nice hash, right? So people would take a look at all the coins out there and say, okay, which one's the most profitable mine right now? And they would switch very quickly to another pool or to another coin to mine it. And in so doing, you could, increase the hash rate on one coin by a factor of 10 in seconds. All of a sudden you have a 51% attack on that coin accidentally, just because people were following a profit. But anyway, this largely doesn't exist. People are using PPS, and that means switching pools is easy. So for the miners out there, be prepared to do it.
Yeah, be prepared, and hopefully, if Braidpool comes to market, we won't have to worry about any of this.
Yeah,
is what we should be striving for. So thank you for, again, starting this work in 2015, and then shout out to the Bitcoin Munich meetup for forcing a conversation about it recently, and hopefully this podcast pushes the conversation a bit forward, and we can make sure Bitcoin's sufficiently resilient to these government attacks, because they will be coming.
They will be coming. Yeah. Governments are not going to take, removal of their fiat hegemony and the powers that gives them lying down, right? They're going to fight tooth and nail.
Yeah.
So yeah, anybody who wants to contribute to this, please reach out to me, Bob McElrath on Twitter. Again, there is a Braidpool IRC channel, irc.freenode.net. I've spoken with Jungly. We'll be setting up a mailing list and possibly other communication channels soon. And if you are interested in having something like this created and are willing to put some money where your mouth is to fund it, please let me know also. And I will try to connect you with some great developers who want to build it and get it done.
Awesome. I guess one last question before we leave, just to be adversarial about this particular topic. Like, what's the knock on this?
What's the knock? What do you mean?
Like, why could this be a bad thing? If at all.
Why could this be a bad thing? I can give several things, but they're all fairly deep, long conversations. So like in terms of Eric's latency or proximity premium, it can't be completely solved because you still have to post into Bitcoin, which does have a proximity premium. You can certainly make it a lot better, but you can't completely solve it. Another one that I like to think about sometimes, maybe a benefit, maybe a detraction, is that there's this concept out there of a feather fork. And the idea is that the underlying blockchain, like Braidpool, could become the main blockchain over time, with the legacy blockchain essentially becoming, if nobody's using it, everybody's running Braidpool, then Braidpool becomes Bitcoin. Now, this has been proposed under the name Feather Fork as a way to radically alter the rules of Bitcoin, right? It's a way to do a hard fork that without doing a hard fork. It's kind of an opt-in mechanism for a hard fork. Braidpool will work if, only 10% of miners are using it. It doesn't really care. But if it ever got to like 100% of miners using it, then, well, what is the purpose of the original blockchain? If 100% of everybody is using the new one, you've effectively executed a hard fork. Now, that could be good or bad depending on your perspective.
That's a whole nother can of worms. Oh my gosh.
Exactly. I told you.
Right.
Worms.
I guess the number one question that opens up there is like, do the full node validators on the original Bitcoin network, like, would they ever accept, like, would they ever go transact on that other blockchain?
Well, no, but they wouldn't know about it, right? Again, they don't have to know about Braidpool existing. It looks like just another pool producing blocks to them, right?
Yeah.
But if all the people I need to transact with are running Braidpool instead, and Braidpool can carry Bitcoin value in special transactions, in addition to its native sharecoin value, I could transact Bitcoin that way, right? It's similar to a peg sidechain like the Liquid networks or the Risk network or something like that at that point. Except that because it's an underlying layer that reduces Bitcoin blocks as a side effect, it can actually take over the parent blockchain.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, I've heard the argument like liquid lightning could like reduce the protocol layer of Bitcoin to something like Rhinestones, where nothing moves and everything happens on those layers. Sounds similar, but a bit different. And is that a big problem? I guess that's a discussion I would have to.
I know if it's a big problem. I'm a big fan of Lightning. A fan of Liquid too, to a lesser extent. But I think Satoshi had it right. Bitcoin's a settlement layer, and the real value is going to be transacted on Lightning. Like it.
Yeah, I agree. I'm a big fan of Lightning Network. I've been using it a lot, and actually, people are going to be streaming me sats as they listen to this podcast.
Awesome.
It's a crazy world we're living in.
Awesome.
Well, Bob, I know you're a busy man. I appreciate you taking some time to sit down with me and answer my stupid questions today, but I think it's an important
Not
conversation.
stupid at all. Appreciate the opportunity, and I hope we can get this off the ground. I've been trying and failing to get it off the ground for a long time, so I hope this time around people will reach out to me and we can really get this built.
Yeah, I know. I mean, this Bitcoin Munich YouTube conversation got thrown in our Great American Mining chat, so I know our engineers are thinking about it, and I think we'd be willing to help out in these efforts as well. So we should have a side chat about that.
Let's have a side chat. Yeah.
Awesome. We'll coordinate that side chat off air, but I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you again. Have a good one. Peace and love, freaks.